Hello everyone, today we are going to start with our new topic, anatomy of the middle ear. So first let's discuss the embryology part. So the first endodermal pouch along with a small part of the second pouch which forms the tubotympanic recess, okay, and further it leads to the formation of the eustachian tube and the tympanic cavity, okay, that is the middle ear cavity, and along with it the mastoid antrum, and together with the eustachian tube, middle ear, and the mastoid antrum, they are further called as middle ear cleft. Okay, now let's discuss its boundary. Okay, so as we see in the diagram here, this one, so there, first of all, this it is a six-sided box. Okay guys, so what does it mean by six-sided box? It means it has six boundaries such as the roof, floor, lateral wall, medial wall, posterior wall, and the anterior and posterior. Okay, it will be seemed as a cuboid shape. Okay, now, as we see in the diagram, so first of all, the lateral wall. So it is the common wall. Okay, so first, it will, if we observe from the outside, the lateral most part is the pinna, then external auditory canal, then the tympanic membrane, and then after the middle ear. So it is the common wall. So let's understand that it is the common wall between the external auditory canal and the middle ear. Okay, so if we assume that if it is a pinna, then here continues the external auditory canal, and after that there is tympanic membrane, and after that it is a middle ear part. Okay, and further there is inner ear. So between the middle ear and the external ear there lies a tympanic membrane. So it is, what does it mean, that it is the common wall between the external auditory canal and the middle ear. Okay, and this is formed by the tympanic membrane and the scutum also. And scutum, what does it mean by the scutum? Scutum, it is a bone above the pars flaccida, which is a part of the tympanic membrane, which forms the lateral wall of the attic. And what is attic? Attic is the uppermost part of the middle ear cavity. Okay, now if we see the medial wall of the middle ear, so first of all let's see this diagram, that it is a promontory, which is formed by the basal turn of the cochlea, and it is responsible for the high frequency of sound. As we know that the cochlea turns around like this, and the high frequency sound, it is of the widest part, and the low frequency sound, it is the narrowest part. Okay, now after the promontory part there lies a round window. Okay, which further here leads to scala tympani, and there is a second and round window, it is the secondary tympanic membrane, and above that there is the stapes muscle, and over that there is the oval window, and this oval window leads to the vestibule, and vestibule contains the utricle and the saccule. Okay, now if we see the nerves part, now there is the innervation of the facial nerve. Okay, there are two segments of the facial nerve, one is the horizontal segment and one is the vertical segment. Horizontal segment is also known as the tympanic segment of the facial nerve, and the vertical segment, it is known as the mastoid segment of the facial nerve. So in the horizontal segment of the facial nerve, it lies in the medial wall. It is like this, it innervates here. So it is the horizontal segment. Okay, and above to it, it is a lateral semicircular canal. Okay, so if we see this, the whole diagram, this is the posterior most part and it is the anterior part. So here it is the first genu, which is what genu is, what geniculate ganglion. Okay, now now there is one processus cochlear formis. Okay, processus cochlear formis is what? It is a hook like structure, okay, which is present antero and superiorly, because it is in the upper part, so anterior superiorly on the medial wall. Okay, and it has, what does it signify? I mean to say that what does it significance here. So its significance here is that the from the processus cochlear formis there, the tensor tympani muscle originates from a canal in the anterior wall of the middle ear, because this is the anterior wall of the middle ear, and it then runs medially. Okay, it runs medially where it tendons and winds around and takes a lateral turn. Okay, here the tensor tympani muscles winds around and takes a lateral turn to attach to the handle of malleus. It attaches to the handle of malleus, but it takes a lateral round. Okay. Now, second one is it acts as a landmark for the first genu of the facial nerve. Okay, and here the facial nerve enters the inner ear through the internal acoustic meatus, and after running through it, it will enter the middle ear on its medial wall. Okay, now there is the bulge of the lateral semicircular canal, which is present on the posterior superior part or portion of the medial wall. Okay, now if we discuss the oval window, this lies where posterior superiorly. Okay, posterior superiorly with the foot process of stapes. Here it is the footplate of stapes. Okay, as we know the structure of the stapes muscle, there is the two crura of the stapes, and it is the footplate of the stapes. Okay, and it's separating the vestibule from the middle ear. It separates the vestibule from the middle ear. Okay, now the bulge of the lateral semicircular canal and the oval window are the important landmarks of the tympanic segment of the facial nerve. Which is the tympanic segment? This. So the oval window and the bulge of the lateral semicircular canal, between this only there lies will be the tympanic segment of the facial nerve, and this runs horizontally in the posterior direction on the medial wall. Okay, and here it is a round window. It lies in the posterior inferiorly on the medial wall, and it is covered by the secondary tympanic membrane. Okay, which separates the middle ear from the scala tympani. Okay, guys, so let's begin with the posterior part, posterior wall. Okay, so in the posterior wall, as we see, it is a common wall between the middle ear and the mastoid. Okay, now what are the important structures here? Now if we see that there is in the upper part there is aditus. Okay, on the upper border of this wall there is an opening which is known as the aditus, which what does it connects? It connects the attic. And what is the attic? Attic is the upper part of the middle ear cavity to the mastoid antrum. So the aditus connects the attic, which is the uppermost part of the middle ear, and it connects the attic to the mastoid antrum. Now if we see there is a pyramid. Okay, in this diagram if we see there is a pyramid, it is a projection. Okay, now where does the pyramid originates? It originates, which originates the stapedius muscle. And what does the stapedius muscle do? The stapedius muscle attaches to the neck of the stapes. Okay, here here there is a stapedius muscle, and this attaches to the neck of the stapes. Okay, and it is supplied by the nerve of the second arch, that is a facial nerve. Okay, and one reflex we can also understood that, which reflex here it is produced, that is the stapedial reflex. Now in the posterior wall, as we discussed earlier, in the medial wall there was the horizontal segment of the facial nerve, but in the posterior wall there is the mastoid segment, or the descending segment, or the vertical segment of the facial nerve. Okay, which takes a lateral turn onto the posterior wall, which is known as the second genu. And there in the medial wall it was the first genu, and here it descends vertically. Okay, behind the pyramid. It lies behind the pyramid. Okay, so it lies behind the pyramid, that is why it is known as the descending segment. Now one more, there is a sinus which is known as the sinus tympani. Okay, so what is sinus tympani? This is the area medial to the bulge of the vertical or the mastoid part of the facial nerve. So it is, here is the mastoid part of the facial nerve. Medially to it lies the sinus tympani. Okay, and it is bounded above by the two muscles, which one is, one muscle is ponticulum and another one is subiculum. The upper part is the ponticulus and the lower is the subiculum part. Okay, and this sinus tympani, it is also known as the hidden area of the middle ear, because it is the most common site for the residual cholesteatoma. Okay, because in this area we can find the residual of the infectious organism, or any infection can be found here. Okay, now there is one, the chorda tympani nerve cavity. So what is this, the vertical or the descending part of the facial nerve. Okay, in the posterior wall, that is the mastoid portion of the temporal bone, ultimately exits the temporal bone through the stylomastoid foramen. And now, if we will see the upper part of the middle ear, and it then ultimately exits the middle ear cavity. Okay, now one is there is a fossa incutis. This one is the fossa incutis part. It is on the posterior wall and it rests the short process of incus. Here the short process of incus it is formed. Okay, now below to that there is triangular recess known as the facial recess. Okay, now what are the boundaries of the facial recess? It is in the superior most part there is the fossa incutis. In the lateral part there is the chorda tympani entry, and the medially it is the descending facial nerve segment. Okay, now in the anterior part, okay, if we see the anterior part, in the anterior part there is a opening of the eustachian or the pharyngotympanic tube. Okay, from the anterior wall of the middle ear cavity starts its bony part, and which forms the lateral one third, and the medial two third, which is the fibrocartilage cartilaginous. Okay, guys. So, if we see the stapedial reflex, which was formed by the footplate of the stapes. Now here, what is the mechanism of that? If there is production of the loud noise, there is the contraction of the stapedius muscle. This pull on the oval windows so that it will decrease the noise trauma. Okay, and what are the nerves involvement here? The nerves are afferent, it is the cranial nerve 8, and the efferent, it is the cranial nerve 7. Okay, thank you guys.